Never say never, because limits, like fears, are often just an illusion.
Welcome to another edition of Confidently Speaking with DOC. I am your host, David Doc Shirey, author of the book, Rare Confidence, Strategies and Inspiration to Strengthen Your Belief that You Can Achieve Anything. Episode number 14 on tap tonight. And I tell you, we're talking sports tonight. We have not talked sports on this show since episode number 1. Now, anybody who knows me knows that sports is my passion. I didn't want, though, this show to be just about sports. So I managed to keep 12 episodes in between before we went back to it. But we're going back to it tonight because I was able to get one of Pittsburgh's most respected and talented journalists. And we're going to introduce him in a minute. But as always, I will remind you to please comment, ask questions. We'll get a bunch of those on the air tonight. This is a participatory program, and if you can share the video, more people will see it. That will allow me to continue to attract incredible guests. Let's meet tonight's guest.
Kevin Gorman is a Pittsburgh native and a graduate of Penn State University School of Journalism. He got his start in the newspaper business with the Dallas Morning News. He's also written for the Kansas City Star and the Commercial Appeal before settling in with the hometown Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, where he's been for over 20 years. Kevin also appears on 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh as a weekend sports talk show host. He's been both a beat writer and a columnist. If it's happened in Pittsburgh sports over the last 21 years, you bet your bottom dollar that Kevin has probably covered it. From high school football and basketball to the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Pitt Panthers, and more. I am pleased to welcome to the program Kevin Gorman.
My man, Kevin. How you doing tonight, Kevin?
Great intro, Doc. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, listen, I really appreciate you being here with us tonight. You know, we got sports opening back up. This is an incredibly busy time for you and your industry, and yet you're taking time out of it to spend time with me and our viewers tonight. And I want you to know how much I appreciate it. Kevin, I want to share with our viewers how you and I got to know each other. And it really started about 18 years ago, when I was the director of sports sales for this really cool technology called the Landro Play Analyzer. And you were kind enough to write a full-page article in the Sunday Tribune-Review. That's Bobby Palco on the bottom there. That's me on the top. And if you look there, you can see I've kind of circled Sunday, September 29th, 2002, written by Kevin Gorman. And that is yours truly, pointing to the technology. And, you know, that was really helpful to me at the time because we were trying to get a lot of publicity for this technology. And I appreciated that then, Kevin, and I still appreciate that and you right now. So thank you, and I'm thrilled to have you on board here.
Well, it's a pleasure. And I remember, you know, what a good salesman you were, that you were like, I'll come to you. I'll come and give you the presentation. I just wanted to ask you a few questions, and you came in and gave us the presentation and showed us step by step how everything worked. And you were making a sales pitch knowing that you weren't going to make the sale, at least monetarily, in terms of selling me the Landro play analyzer, but you also were able to really kind of pitch that story and make it, it could have been, just kind of a run of the day story. Instead, you made it the Sunday spotlight story for us.
Well, I really appreciate it. I actually traveled around the country doing that with media outlets around the country, and I used you as like my guinea pig to see if it would work. So I think it worked out well. All right. So as I thought about what we were going to talk about tonight, Kevin, so much for us to talk about. The easy thing would be for you and I to talk about Pittsburgh sports. It's probably, it's one of the great loves of my life, without a doubt. But that would be too easy. That's what 93.7, the Fan, of which you work for, is for. Anybody can turn on talk radio, listen to that. Towards the end of the show tonight, we are going to get a little hyper local and do some rapid fire Pittsburgh sports talk. But for the bulk of tonight, I thought it would be great if we really just kind of talked about some of the issues that are facing the sports world. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of rule changes. There's a lot of things happening right now. And, you are as in tune as much as anybody. So I figured that would be a good plan of action. Cool?
That sounds cool to me.
All right, great. All right, so where else were we going to start but the virus, right? And Major League Baseball is about to start things off. The Buccos have an exhibition game in 48 hours here in Pittsburgh against the Indians. The NBA is playing the boy in the bubble down in Orlando. They're going to start at the end of the month. The NHL is going to play games that count in Canada only a few days later. The Big Ten has canceled all their non-conference games. The Ivy League has canceled all fall sports. The NFL, partly due to timing of their calendar, but they've kind of largely been Teflon up to this point. They had that incredible virtual draft with Goodell in his basement. That was a huge hit. Of course, we were dying for anything, except for, 1938 home run derbies and stuff. But the NFL is starting to run into some troubled waters. From what I've read, the NFLPA and the owners can't agree on how to start the season, what the testing is going to look like. Originally, the owners wanted them to wear masks. And from what I've gathered, they've agreed in principle to wear the shields made by Oakley, because these shields have these little plastic slits or holes in them that block the direct path of a droplet, but they do let you breathe freely, communicate, and able to hear. Kevin, there's so much involved in terms of money. What's going to happen when there's an outbreak that's invariably going to happen? Are these things going to are these leagues going to just shut down, or are we going to see games?
With the NFL, the NFL pushed through with the draft, and I think a lot of people looked at that and saw it as, hey, that was a victory for sports, was that they did this draft virtually. They conducted it. They were able to get great television ratings because of that. And I think television really drives a lot of this with, the NFL and the other sports leagues trying to, resume or complete their seasons, especially the championship part of it. And, to me, the NFL has the most difficult job, because that's the sport where there is hand-to-hand contact on every single play. And you're also dealing with a roster of, 53 players plus the practice squad. And so, it's going to be very difficult to do the social distancing. It's going to be very difficult for them to try to prevent the transmission of the disease from one player to another, or from players to coaches, or players to front office personnel. And I just, I think if there's anybody that's going to try to pull it off and probably have the greatest chance of being successful, it's probably the NFL, because it's the most powerful and established league in sports right now. But I also think it has the greatest challenge. And I'm seeing some of those challenges covering the Pirates, and seeing some of the things they're dealing with. And that's a sport where the players don't necessarily have to come into contact. So I don't know. It seems like there's been some backlash on the helmet with the face mask built in. It seems like there's some concern that, about, I don't know how you would be able to conduct a training camp where you have multiple locker rooms, or where you're able to socially distance both on and off the field when players have to line up right next to each other. I'm not sure whether it's actually possible or feasible. But I'm sure the NFL, being the billion-dollar franchise that it is going to do everything it can to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like Coach Tomlin coming in at halftime, addressing the team, trying to get them pumped up to go out there in the second half. You'd imagine all 53 are going to have to be in the same room.
And it might be in a virtual setting. Perhaps go in separate quarters and log in, and they do everything by like a Zoom call. That's a real possibility. I don't know how they can pull this off without the numbers getting better. But it'll be interesting, and it'll be very complicated more than anything. I think a lot of people just think that, well, they don't want to play. Trust me, these athletes train year round. They put their bodies through a lot of punishment, and they take you. This isn't the old days of the 60s and 70s where they had a part-time job in the off season. They smoked cigarettes and drank beer. And like Mario Lemieux would say, I stopped ordering fries. That was my way of training. These guys train year round,
right,
and they're in tip-top shape. And then they ramp up for the start of the season to get into everyday shape. But I also look at it as, I don't know that we're going to be able to have a college football season. I don't know that we're going to be able to have the sports world the way we want it. But I do think that the professional athletes who are going to be paid for this and who have contracts, and I think you're going to see the same bargaining issues with the NFL and its Players Association as you saw with Major League Baseball and its players union, that people are going to start wondering is, okay, if we play one game, do we get paid our full amount of the season, or do we at least get a certain amount of money for one game as opposed to being paid game by game? And what are the health and safety protocols? I mean, I saw J.J. Watt had tweeted something out today saying the players want to play, but they also want to be healthy, and they also don't want to get infected by this COVID-19 that could, there are some reports out there that could cause long-term damage. I think we look at this strictly from a getting infected and then the mortality rate. But there's also people that I know someone personally, I can't say who it is, but I know someone whose son is an athlete who was infected with COVID, is now trying to play college football and has a heart issue. And this is the reality of this.
And, when you think about athletes, especially football players, but all athletes, we've always kind of thought of them as gladiators. But even now, more than ever, it's like the general public is thirsting for sports and NFL, and we're really putting them out there. And to some degree, we're putting their lives at risk.
Yeah, no question. And we're putting the lives at risk of the people who coach them, the people that work in the front office, whether it's marketing or the ticket sales, anybody that's coming into contact with people that are putting themselves at risk, along with their families. Some of these players that you're seeing opt out in baseball have, families that they have a pregnant wife, or that they have young children, or they have somebody with a compromised, immune system that they have to be very careful about. And so I think I would warn people not to be too quick to judge people who don't want to play or who elect to opt out for family or health concerns.
Now, the NFL has some other issues they're dealing with, too. Mainly, they're still dealing with this concussion issue. Last year, there were 224 diagnosed concussions in the league. That was up 5% over 2018, even with new rules that are put into place to mitigate concussions. Kevin, what do you see the NFL doing in terms of potential rule changes to make the game even safer moving forward?
I mean, I think they've done a lot in reaction. I don't think they did much prior to that, but now in reaction to, the concussion movie and the lawsuits that have come and the death of Mike Webster and other players, Junior Seau, that they've seen the effects of CTE or even just traumatic brain injury. And I think it's important to label it as traumatic brain injury. The whole idea that you're affecting something that doesn't just quickly heal on its own. I've written a lot about concussions over the years, especially when Sidney Crosby was dealing with it. But I think that's something that, I think they're going to have to establish the baselines, which these are things that they already do in terms of the health and safety protocols. But they establish the baselines and then give players the amount of time to recover. I don't think it should be at the player's discretion, and I don't think it should be at the coach's discretion. It has to be at the discretion of not necessarily even just a team doctor, but perhaps a secondary doctor who isn't affiliated with the league and doesn't have any bearing one way or the other whether that plays. Because I think that's the thing, is we have to address this as if it's not, I've tried to stop myself using terms like seeing stars or getting your bell rung, and be careful about the language that I use, because I think sometimes it's like, oh, well, all I had to do was clear the cobwebs. We're talking about your brain. We're talking about long-term health effects that could cause, some serious health problems that as you get into your post-playing career. And that's what I think players, when they think of themselves as gladiators, they think of themselves as warriors and, soldiers, that they look at themselves in that same way. And we have to worry a little bit more about the post-traumatic stress disorder that could come along with it, more so than just them being the heroes on Sundays.
No doubt. And, I feel terrible for all the high school athletes, too. I mean, you think just to this year that just finished, the winter sports, the Hoopers, they didn't get to finish out their season. A lot of them were having incredible seasons, trying to win local and state championships. Spring sports, baseball never even got off the ground. And now I know the PIAA just said they're going to try to move forward here with football. We'll see what happens. Let's turn our attention to baseball, Kevin. We have a lot of stuff to talk about here. Almost any of these issues we could probably do a whole hour on, but let's try to move a little quickly on some of these issues, because I want to get your thoughts on a bunch of stuff. Baseball has made 3 rule changes. 2 of them specific to this season, and 1 they were going to go with anyways. Let's talk about that one first. The relief pitchers. A relief pitcher must now face a minimum of 3 batters or pitch to the end of a half inning, barring injury or illness. Now, this clearly has been done to speed up the game, Kevin, but I do not like it. What do you think of that rule?
I don't like any games that kind of, or any rule changes that kind of butcher the game and the tradition of the game, the purity of the game. And I'm not against, doing different things to make the game more exciting or to make the game even faster. But in this case, you could be pitching a fantastic game, and then all of a sudden, let's just say, for example, because we just celebrated the anniversary, I think a couple weeks ago, Francisco Cordova takes a no-hitter into the through 9 innings, and then all of a sudden in the 10th inning, they're going to put a runner on second. You could potentially lose a no-hitter or a perfect game or something along those lines to these rule changes just to speed up the games. In a time when fans are really, craving sports, and then we're saying, well, let's get the games over with a little more quickly. So I'm not a fan of that one, and I'm not a fan of the rule with
second base. Yeah, let's talk about that. And, that's why I show this picture of this little leaguer, because that's what I think of the second base rule. For any of our viewers that aren't aware, this rule has been put into place just for this shortened season and just for the regular season. And it's also designed to speed up the game. It automatically puts a runner on second base, the next guy who was due up in the batting order, at the beginning of every half inning and extra innings. And, slightly over 8% of major league games go to extra innings over the last 5 years. But it just feels really like traveling 12-year-old all-star game-ish to me. I don't know.
I think today is the 50th anniversary of Three Rivers Stadium opening, if I'm not mistaken. And my best memory of Three Rivers Stadium was an extra inning game. And it's a game, I believe, went 16 innings. And I think it was in the 1992 season when Barry Bonds was in his final year with the Pirates. And they went 16 innings against the Atlanta Braves. And I want to say it was like a Buck night type of deal.
Yeah.
Started sitting below the scoreboard in the outfield. And I finished the game 16 innings later, sitting in the front row of third baseline, watching, this crazy finish and everything. And so, that's one of those things to me, like that's the excitement of the game. And I realize it can drag on and everything, but I don't know. Could you imagine if they said in hockey that we're just going to go straight to the shootout? Could you imagine in basketball if they did, whoever, we're going to shoot from the 3-point line to see who gets whoever makes the first basket. I mean, in the NFL, I don't really care for the way they do their rules. It's at least college football is fair in the sense that both teams get
an equal chance
yard line.
Sure.
They each get a chance at it. But even that, I don't know. I'm not a fan of a lot of this stuff, and I realize this is a different year, and it's almost, to me, this is a season that's going to have an asterisk on it,
right?
Much like a strike shortened season or something along those lines. But Yeah, I'm not a fan of the three batter rule for the pitchers, and some of the stuff to me, you wonder how much you want to change the game just to get the season completed. There's a part of me that I've wondered whether maybe they should have just, instead of saying, hey, let's have a season, perhaps they could have had like home run derbies and just made it a television spectacle. The Pirates against the Indians.
There you go.
And let's have a home run derby. Josh against their best pitcher. I mean, if you're going to change the game, if you're going to butcher the game that much, that's my part of it.
Well, Brian Bennett, a viewer, brought up a question, which was the third rule change, which is the designated hitter. Now, there's been a segment within baseball fighting to force the National League to use the designated hitter, which the American League adopted in 1973. As a baseball purist, listen, putting a runner on second base is even crazier to me than the designated hitter. But I've always resisted that because I feel as if it totally mutes the manager, right? Why don't you just have the freaking general manager throw out the lineup card if you're going to have the designated hitter? What's the manager doing all game? I hate it.
There's some general managers who would be perfectly fine with that. I
know they would.
There's some general managers that feel like they should be the manager on the field as well as off the field. And I don't know. I'm torn on it because I was born in '73, so I grew up with this. I didn't know baseball without the DH, and I always kind of subscribed to. I guess my dad had this view of baseball, and he's the one who really kind of showed me how to love the game. But he had this view like, hey, the Pirates were great in the 70s. And, 79, I was 6 years old. That was kind of my introduction to baseball as a little kid. And the Pirates won the World Series. But then in the 80s, when I was playing baseball, the Pirates were mostly bad for the majority of that time. And my dad used to say, hey, it's okay to have a team in the American League. It's okay to have somebody else that you can root for if the Pirates are bad. Enjoy the game. And so I kind of grew up enjoying the designated hitter. Here's my problem with here's why the universal DH exists this season. First of all, it's just to prevent the pitchers from getting injured. They understand that this is a kind of a quick spring training to get these players ready. A lot of the players stayed in good shape and are ready to go. A lot of these guys are built up to 6 innings, 100 pitches right now, which is where they would be at the end of a regular spring training, and that's after only a couple weeks. But in some ways, it could benefit a rookie manager like Derek Shelton with the Pirates, who spent most of his coaching career, I think all of his coaching career, in the American League.
Right.
He didn't coach with Tampa Bay. He coached was the Twins bench coach the last 2 years, and in between that, he worked in Toronto. So that's the strategy that favors him. It's also a strategy that could potentially favor the Pirates with Josh Bell and his defensive deficiencies, although I think he's gotten better. And potentially a guy like Gregory Polanco, who's coming off a season where he played like 40-plus games because of a shoulder surgery that the shoulder never truly healed. He looks better now. I mean, I've seen him play, although he hasn't practiced the last couple of days, and you have to wonder why. The Pirates won't say so, but you have to wonder why he's not practicing. But I think it's going to be good for this season. I think this is a good season to experiment with it. Whether it's good for long term, I don't know. But my problem with the DH is, my problem with the rules change there is not so much with the DH. I'm not a fan of interleague play. I like that the leagues had separate identities. I like that they didn't crisscross and play. And the biggest problem I had with the DH was when they had interleague games, the American League teams would have to come to a National League city and play by NL rules. And I thought, what's the point of me watching an American League game in my town where I don't see the DH if the DH can't play? I thought what made it a lot more interesting was if the DH would have come to Pittsburgh, say the Indians play the Pirates, which they're going to do Saturday night. And let's say the DH comes to Pittsburgh, and the Pirates have to adjust to the visiting team. Or if the National League team goes to an AL city, all of a sudden the AL has to throw the pitcher out there as part of their batting order. That to me would have made it a lot more interesting.
That way the home crowd gets a different look at it. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. I mean,
another aspect of it that I haven't heard anybody talk about was, now granted, they had to throw these rules together at the last minute, but these teams are built to play baseball a certain way. So the National League teams, to some degree, are at a little bit of a disadvantage where they really didn't have a whole offseason to build a team with utilizing a DH when they do play these, interleague type games. All right, let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about another problem facing baseball, and that's dwindling attendance. The pandemic notwithstanding. They were down about 1 million fans last year after experiencing a 4% drop the year before. Games are slow. Young kids have other interests and are on their phones. The owners make way more money from TV anyways. How big of an issue, Kevin, is the lack of attendance and the dwindling attendance in baseball?
Well, it's a big issue, especially when you're no longer considered the national pastime.
Right.
When football has surpassed baseball, when hockey is drawing better TV numbers, at least locally. And so those are all things that should be concerns to owners, especially owners like Bob Nutting, who really need to get the attendance, especially when they have a smaller ballpark. That ballpark was built to have some ambiance. That ballpark was built to have small crowds, but to have a packed house, as opposed to 55,000 seats
Sure.
stadium. And so I look at that as a real issue that they have to do. And I think sometimes my concern is that they cater to the lowest common denominator. I was actually having a conversation with a friend about, I'm curious to see how these games are going to be broadcast on AT&T Sportsnet, where they spend a lot of time showing the fans eating an ice cream cone, or showing the fans, little kids eating cotton candy, showing the pirate parrot, showing everything but the baseball. And I'm curious to see if they show a little more of the nuance of the baseball with no fans in the stands. And I want to see the positioning. I want to see where certain guys line up against a certain batter. And I want the broadcasters to explain to us, hey, this is a guy who's known for hitting the ball down the line while the third baseman's hugging the line. Or this is a guy who's known to, as a pull hitter, and that's why you're seeing a defensive shift. And they explain those things, but sometimes it's almost more of they say it and they just kind of in a casual tone. I'd like to see a little more of the focus on the players and the game and less about the fans, given that they're not going to be any there. And also, I'm curious to see what the Pirates do, given that there's people that have season tickets that haven't asked for a refund, whether they'll do something like put their cardboard cutouts in their seats and at least give the appearance of fans. That could be a fun thing. Although at PNC Park last night, and they have the canopy tents. I think by my count, there were 28 canopy tents, 16 behind home plate, not directly behind home plate, but around the home plate area, and another 12 out in left field bleacher area next to the bullpens, that's where, for social distancing reasons, when they have full squads there and they're playing games, that they're able to spread the players out so they're not all sitting next to each other in the dugout. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see potentially on television.
Right. My initial show, I had Paul Alexander on, and I asked him about what sports look like. He had an interesting take. He said, they're going to be made for TV televised events, but one thing, we should be able to hear everything that normally we wouldn't with the crowd in terms of what the coaches are yelling and even maybe some give and take back between the players. So that should be interesting. I want to turn our attention to hockey for a minute. As you and I both know, Pittsburgh is a hockey crazy town, as is much of the Northeast and the North, the Minnesotas, the Wisconsins, the Michigans. But in areas of the country like that don't have an NHL team, and even some cities that do have an NHL team in the South and the West, they're not really bringing in a lot of interest and a lot of fans there. What can the NHL do, Kevin, to change this cult-like attraction to the game and broaden their appeal to more people?
That's an interesting thing. I think, the easy solution would be to put a superstar in every town. It certainly worked here in Pittsburgh. I mean, we've had the good fortune as a sports town to go from Mario Lemieux to Jaromir Jagr to Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. So the Penguins have had that draw, that feature attraction to draw. And, when the Penguins didn't have those players, nobody went to the games. I mean, I remember the early 2000s, the gap between Jagr and the arrival of Crosby and Malkin, and how empty the arena was and how little interest there was. So, I mean, part of that is you have to have teams that have star power and that win. And the other thing is you have to make sure that you're going to the right markets. And you could say very easily, well, the warm weather markets aren't into hockey, and that's not necessarily true. It didn't necessarily work in Atlanta, but it's been a smash. Not to use their phrase, but it's been a smash in Nashville,
Right.
And in Las Vegas. I think part of it is putting a good. I think it's the true of any sport and in any city. If you put a good product on the field and you have a winning team, people are going to show up and support that team. I would say Pittsburgh's probably a little more of a fair weather fan type of town, more so than others. And I say all the time on the radio that this is a town that's been very spoiled by the championships won by the Steelers, Penguins, and Pirates, by the national championship won by Pitt football, and by the
no doubt.
Pitt basketball fans were furious that they hadn't made it to the Final Four. And I thought to myself, the success under Jamie Dixon was unparalleled in Pitt basketball history. And yet the people were like, oh, I think that was just the whole mentality of Pittsburgh. We demand a winner. And I think that's a great mentality to have as a sports town. But I also think, to some degree, you don't appreciate the great teams when you have them because of that.
Yeah, I mean, for a 10-year stretch there, they had a top 3 winning percentage in the country, along with Duke and I think Kentucky. So, I don't know how anybody could have argued about that. Let's talk about the NBA for a minute and these super teams. Do you think, Kevin, we saw it with LeBron in Miami. We see it with KD when he was out in Golden State with Steph. We see it a little bit now with LeBron in LA with Anthony Davis. Do you think that the competitive balance is being kind of thrown out of whack? And as a fan, there's a lot of people that have been turned off by these super teams. Do you like the super teams?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a shame that more guys would rather join forces with other superstars to create a super team rather than build one from within. I think that's more the problem that we're seeing, is that some guys don't want to do it alone. They don't want to carry the burden of being the superstar and try to attract others more so than they can go somewhere else and say, well, we add 2 more, 1 or 2 more pieces and we're one of those super teams. But, you think back to, the heyday of the NBA in the 80s, and, the Lakers had Magic and Kareem and Worthy, and they even had great players like Jamal Wilkes and Michael Cooper and, Norm Nixon was there. I mean, they had fantastic. That was a super team. The Boston Celtics, you think of how many guys they had there with the front line alone of McHale, Parrish, and Larry Bird. You think about the 76ers when they had Julius Erving and Moses Malone on the same team. I mean, I don't think this is a new concept, but I do think what we're seeing that's a little bit different is a superstar not necessarily staying in one town and be willing to be the guy who goes and joins somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, you would think that LeBron James would have spent his whole career in Cleveland, and Kevin Durant in Oklahoma City. And imagine the super team that, had they kept them together, Oklahoma City could have had
right
Westbrook, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. There were shots to go around, but certainly they had 3 of the biggest stars in the game, and they were playing at a very high level at a very young age. I don't think it's a new concept, but I do think it's kind of tough for the cities that don't have that superstar triumvirate to some degree,
right,
to really be able to kind of showcase that, or the teams that don't have, or the cities that maybe aren't as attractive to a star player, who say, hey, I'd rather be in the spotlight in a city like New York, Boston, Miami, or LA.
And I think the one difference between those great teams you mentioned from back in the day and today is, today it's the actual superstar who's acting as the general manager and trying to put that team together. Let's talk a little bit about gambling in the sports industry. So the AAF, the Alliance of American Football, short-lived, now defunct, but they had this really interesting concept. They had this app, and what I'm showing on the screen right now is a screenshot of the app that allowed you to bet on every single play. Now, unfortunately for them, the app didn't work very well. Believe me, I tried. And the league only played 8 weeks out of its scheduled 10-week season before folding. But mobile gambling is really here to stay, and is probably the wave of the future, and was a gigantic part of the Alliance of American Football's business plan. Kevin, do you see any of the 4 major sports leagues going to a direct through the league gambling model anytime soon?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head there. I think the NFL is going to try to do as much as it can to prevent gambling unless it controls the gambling. And so I think, yeah, I do think you're going to eventually see that. I think one of the signs that the NFL is changing its ways toward that is the of having a team in Las Vegas. So that was a city that they always steered clear of. But now that they realize that gambling is going on no matter where they are located and that it can happen in every city, I think they're going to embrace it. If you think back, it wasn't that long ago, 10, 15 years ago, or maybe even somewhere in that range. It was sometime around one of their Super Bowl seasons that the Steelers had to divest of some of their in the team, the Rooney family, because of their interest in racetracks and casinos and things like that. So, yeah, I think they're going to embrace it, and I think they're going to try more than anything is to control it and make sure that money's funneled into the league, into its players, more so than to outside companies. And I think you're going to see apps become very prominent and prevalent this time during this quarantine, this downtime with these sports. I'm interested to see what teams do in baseball, or what the Major League Baseball does to replace the absence of fans and the lack of the crowd noise. We've been at Pirates practices during training camp where they're piping in artificial crowd noise. And the problem with it is the crowd isn't reacting to the plays. It's just artificial noise, reacting to the play. You don't know whether the guy hit a home run or not. It's just crowd noise, almost like listening to a Steelers practice getting ready for a dome or something like that. But there is an app that they've used in boxing. It's called Hear Me Cheer, HearMeCheer. And it's something where people can log into that app and cheer for their team. And there's a possibility that maybe they'll use something like that, where I could see Major League Baseball linking up with an app like that, though it's not created on its own. Perhaps they create a partnership and use that as a way for to create natural sound, even if it's through an artificial app there.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the more people who log on to the app to cheer for one side or the other will make the crowd noise tip into their favor. Correct?
That could be a way it works. I mean, and perhaps that's in theory. The other thing is maybe the people that are in charge of it could be the home team, and they only use the crowd noise. Right. That works in their favor. That could be home field advantage.
Yeah, imagine the virtual Steeler Nation if they go to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road. What would happen to that home crowd? All right, let's turn our attention to the NCAA, because there's a lot going on with licensing. And, last October, the NCAA said that it eventually intends to allow college athletes to earn compensation for the use of their name, their image, their likeness. And of course, the devil is in the details, and those still have not been worked out yet. But we have seen a tremendous uptick in recent years with this so-called transfer portal. And it kind of feels like the very beginnings of college free agency. Where do you see this headed, Kevin? Because in my mind, I'm thinking we're going to get to a point where kids are going to transfer based on where they have a chance to be compensated higher. Where anywhere else in America, that's what America's all about. But we've had this idea of college sports as that's not what it's about. So
I'm a little more concerned with the ability to use the compensation as a lure in recruiting. As it is in college basketball, it's already working that way. The Zion Williamson case is being an example that and Mike Krzyzewski has a built-in advantage over a lot of coaches, being that he coaches USA basketball. So he's able to get the top 18 under prospects, where he's able to form relationships with those players at a young age and be able to recruit those players. So there's a lot of people that feel like he has a distinct advantage over the other coaches. What concerns me, for one, is that the players aren't being compensated. And a lot of people say, well, they're getting a scholarship. Well, that scholarship is essentially a write-off for those universities. And those players are helping generate millions of dollars in revenue and aren't receiving any parts of that revenue, even for their likeness. They're also not permitted to work. That's the other part of it. They're not even getting a job. And they're not even allowed to get, jobs like work studies like I was able to do when I was in college, work 20 hours and get some type of cash. So what it leads to is the corruption in the sport. And I think that's the thing you have to be careful with, is corruption in college athletics, because we want to view it as the last prestige, amateur sport that there is. And, to some degree, that's very misleading of all the things that go on there. So I think in terms of the transfer portal, I'd be much more in favor of a one-time transfer without penalty rule, that you can transfer one time in your college career without having to sit out. I think what it would do is I would think would lead to a lot of people who thought they were going to come in and play right away, transfer. I would think that it'd probably be better to say you're not allowed to transfer after this date, or you're not allowed to transfer and be eligible immediately at another school if you were to leave in mid-season. Then you could see, kids do that. I think there are things that you have to put in place to protect the integrity of the game. But I also think that, this idea that players are transferring and that, some guys, there was a flow chart that was basically saying if you're trying to transfer, are you going to a Power 5 program? Yes. No. Okay, you're ineligible. If you're going to this, if you're transferring, do you have a sick relative? Is that sick relative in a wheelchair, or they just have illness? Yes and no. And it gets to, do you play quarterback? And if you play quarterback, chances are you're going to be eligible. But that's the thing, is it should be a rule that is kind of a flat rule for everybody, not one that the NCAA just kind of handpicks. Okay, we're going to let you be eligible, but rule you ineligible.
It does seem very arbitrary. Kevin, esports is expected to generate $1.5 billion in revenue here in 2020, primarily from sponsorships and advertising to a global audience of over 600 million fans. You think about the United States of America, we only have 330 some million people here, almost twice as many people as that take part in esports. Deloitte's 2019 digital media trends said that 40% of gamers watch esports events at least once a week. So that's, I was not very good at math. So 40% of 600 million, 250 million people are logging on to watch other people play video games. It's crazy to me, but it's a business that is exploding. I know my son right now is a intern for a growing esports company. They're doing amazing things. You talk about a business hitting its stride at the right time during a pandemic. What do you know about esports, Kevin?
I know very little, but I can tell you this. My son was a gamer when he was young, and it wasn't sports related, but he was on there all the time, like Minecraft and those type of games. That there's, like you said, it's an industry that there's a lot of money. And as you mentioned with the apps and gambling, the sports leagues are going to do whatever they can to, one, go global, and two, make as much money as possible. So it's something that we're going to have to pay attention to. It's just, to me, the idea of me covering somebody playing a video game, it sounds ridiculous. 10 years from now, there may be an esports beat writer covering things for, a newspaper or a website. It wouldn't surprise me. Nothing surprises me with the way things have changed in, a quarter century in this business.
I could not agree with you more. Kevin, let's talk about the Washington football team for a minute. Now, right before we came on the air tonight, there's a breaking story. I don't want to really touch on it because I don't know any of the details, but pay attention. This story has the potential to be a bombshell. But the other story, obviously, with them is the dropping of the name Redskins. And these are the potential names, the betting favorites, the Red Wolves, the Red Tails. As I look at these names, the Warriors are already taken with Golden State. The Generals, those are the Harlem Globetrotters, the team that travels with them. They beat up all the time. The Monuments, they're already tearing all those down. The Red Hawks, that's the Miami Red Hawks from Miami University of Ohio that used to be the Redskins that changed that way back in the 80s. Do you have any favorites there, Kevin?
I like the Red Tails, for the sake of highlighting, the Tuskegee Airmen. I think that's a cool way, and I think the color scheme would work. And I think it would be something that would basically say, instead of being offensive, we're going to do something that's inclusive and that honors our nation's history. I think that would be a great one. But, whatever they do, for one, this is long overdue. And so, yeah, Barry, I'm with you on the Red Tails. But I think it's long overdue for one. I think that if people find it offensive, it shouldn't have taken this long to say, well, not enough people find it offensive. I mean, I think we're seeing a culture out there, and I'm not a huge fan of the cancel culture, but I do think that it is incumbent upon us to change our ways and to do things that are more inclusive and to be less offensive. And I think, it starts with Washington. I try when I write about them, and I can't say I'm always doing this, but there are writers out there that won't call them by their team nickname. I try to call them Washington. Do the same thing now with Cleveland, knowing that they're probably going to change their nickname. So I think it's a matter of, to me, offensive names and offensive images. And I think the name with the Redskins is more offensive than the image. And I think with the Cleveland Indians, the name and the image were both offensive to people. And I think, they've already dropped the Chief Wahoo. And so I think we're going to see them change the name here eventually, whether it's this season or next. But it's that day has come. And I think, when you think about Pittsburgh sports, I think about Brashear. And there was a time when gang violence was prevalent and more prevalent in the 1980s. And they went from the Brashear Bullets to the Brashear Bulls. The Washington basketball team did the same thing, going from the Bullets to the Wizards. And I think people will embrace new. They will embrace the merchandising. It's going to be good for the teams, but they'll also embrace a new identity. And, I think as long as you put a good football team on the field, or a good baseball team in Cleveland's case, I think people will embrace that more than anything. They'll root for a winner more so than they'll root for tradition, especially if that tradition's offensive.
No doubt. I just hope that there's not a wave of murderous dragons out there, and then my beloved Alderdice Dragons have to change their name. All right, so what I want to do... I
always thought the Alderdice had two cool things. They've got one of the coolest nicknames in the Dragons, and then they go by the dice.
Dice, man.
Go by the dice and just roll the dice. And
nobody rolls the dice, Kevin. Nobody rolls the dice.
And I've been an Alderdice basketball fan. I had a friend who played there. Dan Kuhar played there in the late 1980s, and he played with Will Herndon and Will Kinsel, and they were the City League champions back then. So I've followed Alderdice for a long, long time, and so I've always enjoyed my time over at the Dice. I know that's your alma mater.
Herndon's my man. I love those Herndon teams. Let me tell you, Will Herndon was the best, most powerful high school dunker I have ever seen. I mean, you want to talk about dunking with authority, with a presence. He was a man-child out there. I used to bring kids home from college. When I was at Ohio U in the mid-'80s, I did an internship. We were off from Thanksgiving to New Year, so I had 6 weeks off. And one of those grace periods when I was home, I did an internship as an assistant coach on the Dice team when Herndon was the star and they won the city championship. And I used to bring kids from Ohio, and I'd be like, wait till you see my man Will. And I'd take them to games, and the jaw-dropping type of dunks, just as if it was a man amongst boys out there. Just great stuff. All right, I want to turn our attention, Kevin, to the local teams. And what we're going to do here is I want to get your opinion. I'm going to show you the team, give you a quick thought of mine, and then I want you to tell me one reason why they can and one reason why they can't. And then we're going to go into an electrifying moment or two from each team for this millennia. So let's start with our Pittsburgh Pirates. First and foremost, I love the Buccos' new black alternate jerseys with Pittsburgh script across the top, as Josh Bell is modeling here. Do you like those, Kev?
I love them, and I love the gray ones too.
Yep, me and you both. All right, so a 60-game season may offer some hope, right? They've fallen apart after the All-Star break the last few years. Kevin, tell me one reason why you think they might be able to make some noise, and then tell me one reason why it's not going to happen.
If everybody's healthy, the first 5 to 6 batters in their lineup aren't bad. You could go with a lineup that goes Kevin Newman, Brian Reynolds, Adam Frazier, Josh Bell, Gregory Polanco, and maybe Colin Moran or Jose Osuna. That's not a bad top 6. It's not murderer's row, but you've got some power in there. You've got some guys who can hit for average, some guys with good on-base percentage, and you've got some speed at the top of the lineup for those guys to drive in, Polanco and Bell. So they do have a decent lineup. They also are young, and this is a team that has a good bond. They're enthusiastic. There's a lot of positive energy on this team, and they've got a positive energy manager. The reason they won't, are you asking for now the reason why they won't do it?
Yeah. Why won't they?
Why they won't do it, their pitching isn't up to snuff. I mean, they have a lot of guys that are somewhat unproven. Joe Musgrove now must be the ace with Chris Archer and Jamison Tyone out for the season after season-ending surgeries. You've also got guys like Trevor Williams, who's probably better suited to be a middle of the rotation, he's going to be near the top. Mitch Keller had a rough rookie season. He's got a lot of nasty stuff. They really like him as a potential top of the rotation guy, but he's still very raw in that regard, and he still has a lot of things to work through. And, so that's your top three. Derek Holland last year was a guy who started the season as a starter in San Francisco, finished it in the bullpen in Chicago, and then they're talking about piggybacking their fifth starter with Stephen Brault and Chad Kuhl. Brault coming off an injury, shoulder injury that sidelined him last year and sidelined him for a bit in spring training. Kuhl coming back from Tommy John surgery. So the starting pitching isn't there. The bullpen has some talent, whether it's strong enough on the back end to carry this team if they get knocked around for the first innings. I don't know if they have the bullpen depth. But this is a team that certainly, to me, has a bright future. But a shortened 60-game season helps them in one regard. Last year, they got off to a pretty decent start. If they can do the same type of thing, if Bell or somebody else can get hot, and they have some guys who are capable of that. If you remember, Polanco and Brian Reynolds both started their major league careers on 11-game hitting streaks.
Right.
Reynolds actually tied Polanco's team record. And so they have some guys like that. They have Bell, who had a monster May. They have some guys that have that potential that if this team can get hot and maybe they kind of reenact the freak show of 97, anything's possible. I just wouldn't count on it with the Pirates this year.
All right.
Given that they're so young.
The most electrifying moment of this millennia, so since 2000, for the Pittsburgh Pirates, I'm going to show you mine, and I do have a backup one, and then we're going to get your opinion. So to me, it's not even close.
Well, this standing room only crowd trying to get under Johnny Cueto's skin, and they might be. That ball's hit well to left center field. Back toward the track, and that ball is gone. Russell Martin, 2-0 Pittsburgh.
Now, Kev, I've been 7 Super Bowls. I've been to Final Fours. I've been to a lot of freaking sporting events. I have never seen an atmosphere that charged. We had gone, 20 years without a winning season. This city and that crowd was just waiting to explode, and that was the moment it happened.
Yeah, that was a cathartic moment in Pittsburgh sports history. And to me, that was – whether the crowd affected Johnny Cueto dropping the ball or not, that's up for debate. Some people will say it had nothing to do with anything. The crowd believed it had something to do with it. The Pirates believed it had something to do with it.
Right.
And the next pitch showed that the Pirates, were there to win and they were able to win it. That to me is what sports is all about, is that belief and that feeling that the crowd can control the things, that they can control the outcome, that they can inspire the team. And that was a moment right there that I think we'll always remember as a moment where the crowd affected the opposing pitcher. And whether it was they affected him dropping the ball or they affected him not, really finalizing that next pitch and not executing that next pitch. Right. It's all up for debate there. But the truth is that was a one of the great moments in Pirates history. And
would you agree that was the most electrifying Pirate moment of the last 20 years?
No question. The only thing that I can compare to it in that same realm is the home run that Andrew McCutchen hit against the Cardinals right before the All-Star break. I think he hit a home run to like.
Take a look.
The pitch. High fly ball to center field. It's hit pretty well toward the wall. Go! Oh, my God! Oh, my God! Andrew McCutchen has won it. They're going crazy. The Pirates have won this game. You can raise the Jolly Roger and call it maybe the best all time in Pittsburgh. What a game!
That's
time
the one.
There,
That's the one. All right, Kev, I want to go rapid fire here on these next couple, okay? Let's start with the Pens real quick. Now, the national media seems to think that they have as good a shot as any to bring home another cup as long as they can get by the Habs in the qualifying round. Tell me quickly one reason why they can win another cup and one reason why they might not.
I think the return of Jake Gensel is a big boost to this team. That this is a team that got by without him and stayed in contention and stayed on playoff race. And I think he's a big boost to Sidney Crosby on his line. Having healthy Jake Gensel back is getting an all-star back on your team. It's almost like a trade deadline acquisition going into the playoffs. On the same vein, I would say that Sidney Crosby is the difference in all of this. Whether he plays well or plays poorly, and by him playing poorly, I don't mean that he doesn't play well. I mean that he doesn't score goals or put points on the board. And that was the problem last year in the first round series against New York. And that's really what it comes down to is that, the times the Penguins have been eliminated, they've either not had Sidney Crosby when Tampa Bay when the concussion issues were a problem, or Crosby didn't produce like when they lost to Boston and then when they last year to the Islanders. And so, to me, if Sidney Crosby's being productive and if Genny Malkin's being productive, that's a 1-2 punch that few, if any, teams can match. And then you add, a healthy Gensel, that could put the Penguins over the top.
All right. The most electrifying Penguin moment of the last 20 years. I'm going to show you mine, and I have a runner-up, and I want to see if you agree with me on my top one.
Scramble draw comes to the point. Rafalski shoots. Knocked down in the man. Scramble. Lidstrom shoots at a tremendous save by Fleury. They've done it. The Penguins have done it. Sidney Crosby and the Penguins have won the Stanley Cup.
I'm going with that as my top one because it's at that moment. There's shots on goal. He needs to make a save. It's game 7. That's why it was my top one. What do you think?
And he's doing it against a team that was a dynasty. They'd won 4 cup championship games team. And the guy taking the shot was Nicholas Lidstrom, at the time considered the overall hockey player in the game. Fleury made a terrific save. I mean, and the thing to me, if you watch that again, the thing to me that always stood out was Craig Adams diving face first to try to block the puck. And I've talked to him about that. I was in the building that night, and it was unbelievable. Craig Adams basically was willing to take a shot to the face to win the Stanley Cup. And that tells you why hockey's different. That tells you just a little bit about how the Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy. It has the reputation as the hardest trophy to win, is that those guys have played their whole hockey lives for that moment and will do anything it takes to win. I was in the building that night at Joe Louis Arena. I was also in the Joe in 2008 when, and I'll tell you that this to me was one of the moments that gives me goosebumps. And there's a handful of them that I think of, but 2008 was a game 5 in Detroit, and the Penguins were on the brink of elimination in the Stanley Cup final. And it was less than a minute, somewhere around 40 seconds, 35 seconds, somewhere in that range, when Max Talbot scored the goal. And they were chanting, "We want the cup." They could see the cup behind the goal. The cup and the cup keeper had the cup ready on display. And the whole building, and I'm getting goosebumps as I tell you the story, the entire building was chanting, "We want the cup, we want the cup." And I said, I remember writing this, Max Talbot pushed the mute button on the Joe. I mean, it was just all of a sudden went to dead silence. And people, if you in Detroit was going through a depression like we dealt with in the 1980s with the steel mills closing, that's what they were doing with the automobile industry. And that they were dressed to the nines and they were ready to celebrate. That was their championship pop the cork celebration moment. And all of a sudden, then it went to overtime. And I think it was it Peter Sikora or I think it was Peter Sikora that scored the winner in overtime.
I think it was. And then of course Detroit won game 6 in Pittsburgh, with a game that my son and I were at. All right, here's my backup Penguin moment of the last 20 years.
And he'll chase the puck down and he'll get to it first. To the blue line. Schultz with a shot just wide. Bouncing puck. They score! Hornqvist banked it in off Rene. Patrick Hornqvist has the game's first goal with 1:35 left in the third period.
Now, that goal, that was a 0-0 game with a little over a minute to go. That was the Stanley Cup clinching goal right there.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I was in the building for that one too, and that was, that's where the Penguins they've not won the Stanley Cup championship. They've not clinched it in their home building, but that they have a penchant for doing it in other teams' buildings,
Right.
teams' barns, so to speak. And that was a golden moment right there for the Penguins. And Hornquist, probably the least likely guy, but that was his forte, was getting in the crease and creating havoc and putting that puck in there. That's where I think so much that happens in the Stanley Cup playoffs, especially in the Cup final, is sometimes where you see the guys like Talbot and Hornquist, who are the last guys you'd expect to be the heroes, are the ones who are in there doing the dirt and scoring the game-winning goals, or and making those type of plays. It's not always the superstars; it's the grinders.
It's amazing all the titles that our city has won. We haven't clinched one on Pittsburgh soil since Maz in 1960. All right, let's talk about our Steelers. Now, listen, I absolutely love this Steelers defense. They're young, they're fast, they're opportunistic. They got Big Ben coming back. Tell me one reason, Kevin, why you love their chances for Lombardi #7, and tell me another reason why it's probably not going to happen.
Well, the Steelers, the last time they won a Super Bowl was with the NFL's #1 defense. And I think this team has the ability to be that type of defense. They've got playmakers and guys like Watt and Dupree on the outside. I think if you can get to it and Hayward healthy at the same time, the defensive ends are also going to be tough. They've got some good corners now in Hayden and Steven Nelson, and they've got a guy patrol in the middle and Minka Fitzpatrick. I think Devin Bush is going to have another really good season in the middle. So you'd say they're strong up the middle. My concern with this team is their ability to stop the run. They let Javon Hargrave go in free agent. Yeah. He was more of a pass rushing nose tackle than he was a defensive run stopping plugger like Casey Hampton before him. But that would be my concern. I think this is much more about the defense than it is the offense. And I think a lot of people are going to look at Ben Roethlisberger and see what he can do to kind of reignite the offense. I think the offense is going to be better just because Ben's there. Even if there's some drop off at other places, I think they got a good offensive line. They've got some good skill players, and they've got Ben Roethlisberger, one of the premier quarterbacks in the game. But I really think, and I go back to when the Steelers beat the Cardinals in Super Bowl 43, that everybody talks about Santonio Holmes and the play that he made, the catch that he made to win the game. But the Steelers still had to send their defense back out there against a Hall of Fame quarterback in Kurt Warner and a Hall of Fame wide receiver someday in Larry Fitzgerald. And they ended with a fumble, strip sack, and fumble recovery. And that's what I try to remind people, is that they won that game with defense, even if the offense made the most.
Yeah, they had about 34 seconds to go. All right, let's talk about that game, because my two most electrifying Steeler moments of this millennia are from that game. You just referenced my backup one, but it was a close call, but I had to go with it.
Then came the most fateful moment of Super Bowl 43.
18 seconds left of the second quarter. First and goal, Arizona at the 2-yard line. Steelers show blitz. He throws the pass up. It's going to be picked up. James Harrison has it. He's running up the sideline. 25-30, 35-40. Still on his feet at the 45 and down. No, he's still on his feet. Here comes Harrison jumping over people to the 20, the 15, the 10, the 5, and that's a touchdown for Pittsburgh.
Then came.
Now, Kev, it's really a toss-up, right, between that and this.
The greatest catch in NFL history.
One of my absolute favorite moments of my life, I took my son to that Super Bowl, and this is the picture of Alex and I celebrating a Steelers Super Bowl together, thousands of miles away. I really feel for my friends in Cleveland who I went to school with, who've never had this kind of opportunity. They may have seen that as a cheap shot, and it really was. All right, we're coming down the home stretch here, Kevin. Let's talk real quick about Pitt football, because, man, am I excited. They've got a top 5 defense coming back. These two, Parrish Ford and Hamlin, they're going to be playing on Sundays. They got Camp and Weaver coming back on the defensive line. They already got some studs up front there. You've got Kenny Pickett with another year under his belt. Granted, their running game was terrible. They have not really had the Fitzgerald-like receiver. Nobody has the Fitzgerald-like receiver, but they haven't had really a lot of production from that position over the last couple years. Give me one reason why they'll win the ACC Coastal Division and one reason why they won't, Kev.
The reason they will is their defensive line and their defense in general. You mentioned Camp and Weaver coming back. They also got a couple of guys who were looking at the NFL draft that bypassed it in Jalen Twyman and Patrick Jones. And they also have some other guys. Baldonado is a guy that started last season in place of Weaver, now might be coming off the bench. So there's a lot of talent, a lot of depth on that defensive line. It's going to allow the linebackers some freedom, and it's going to give the secondary a chance to be aggressive because they're going to pursue the quarterback, and they're going to put some pressure there that's going to allow that secondary led by Ford and Hamlin, and they've got a couple veteran corners there. So this is the type of defense that Pat Narduzzi has been building for years, and he's finally, you could see it possibly come to fruition. And we saw the same thing in Michigan State, where he took the defense and over the course of 5 or 6 years turned it from one of the worst in the Big Ten to one of the best in the nation. And I think he's doing the same thing at Pitt. The problem with Pitt right now is the offensive line, and as you mentioned, the skill players. I think Kenny Pickett is going to be the catalyst for this team. It's a matter of whether he has the running backs to take some pressure off of him and whether he has the receivers that can be playmakers. And so I think it really starts with the offensive line. If the offensive line can give them some time and create some running lanes for them, that this is a team, if they're good offensively, I expect them to be great defensively. And so Pat Narduzzi, this is the team that should be his good team. This should be the team that takes the step from 7 to 8 win type seasons to possibly a double-digit 10 or 11 win type season, where they could win not just the ACC Coastal, but perhaps be a team that could compete in the ACC championship game. Even though I think that's a tall task to ask of any coach in the ACC is to beat Clemson. But this is one of those reasons where your hope college football season is played and that Pitt gets a chance, because this is a team that is built to win right now. I'm not predicting them to win the ACC championship, but I do think they're going to be a contender.
You know, being a Pitt fan for the last 30 years is like Charlie Brown trying to kick the football with Lucy Holding. All right. The last 20 years, Pitt football has had some electrifying moments. My top 2 are from the same season. It was really close between 1 and 2, but I got to go with this for number 1.
Trust it, and will this kiss pay off for Pat Narduzzi?
You said you loved that coaching.
I did love it. He got a smile out of his kicker probably saying, listen, I'm going to need you later. If we're going to do this, I'm going to need you to get your head in the game, trust your leg and your swing, and let it rip.
Pat Quirin, the long snapper. Ryan Winslow to hold it for Chris Blewett to try to knock off number 2 at Clemson. On the way and good. Blewett got it.
Wow.
Now, Clemson ended up winning the national championship that year, right? Now, my 1A moment is actually 2 moments on the same day, before the game and at the end of the game. Pitt, Penn State, they hadn't played in 16 years. Narduzzi was getting them all kinds of fired up in the locker room, and Ryan Lewis wins it with the interception. Let's take a look.
Respect you! This ain't 1976! It ain't 1968! It's 2016! They don't respect! They're gonna find out!
They're going for the end zone. It's a jump ball. Intercepted by Ryan Lewis.
This will be a learning lesson for a redshirt sophomore making his second start.
I mean, Narduzzi by himself could have been the top moment there.
Yeah, that was a fantastic one. That's one I actually attended as a fan. I bought tickets and rode my bike just to avoid the traffic, rode my bike to Heinz Field and watched that game from up in the 500 level. But it was a really enjoyable game. And I'm a Penn State grad, but I grew up with the Dan Marino, Pitt Panthers, and was a Pitt fan first in terms of, that's the first place I ever saw a college football game was at Pitt Stadium. So I really didn't have a rooting interest in that game. I just wanted to see it to be a good game. And that was probably the best of the renewed series. I'd have to give you mine, though. How do you not talk about 13-9 as one of the great moments? And there's 2. One was the 13-9 game, And the other one was Darrelle Revis's punt return against West Virginia, where Derek Kinder took out 2 blockers and Revis ran down the sideline. Those would be my 2 favorite moments. The 13-9, the Panthers were 28.5-point underdogs. And I remember somebody asking me kind of a question is, hey, how could Pitt win? And I was like, every single thing has to go right for them to win this game. And to the most part, it did. Almost every single thing you could imagine went right for Pitt, and they played a fantastic game defensively. Scott McKillop making a big stop. And so that was one. I'll never forget the Mountaineers fans walking out of their stadium looking like zombies, like looking like they were in complete state of shock and disbelief that they'd probably already booked their trips to New Orleans for the national championship game. And Pitt has a thing. I would not want to be the number 2 team in the nation and having to face the Panthers, because they've done it time and time again where they've beat these number 2 teams. But Revis's punt return was, I think that was in the backyard brawl on Thanksgiving back when Revis was his junior season. And that was just one of those moments where you were just complete disbelief. And I'd seen Darrelle Revis score 5 touchdowns in 4 or 5 different ways in the state championship game at Aliquippa. But that was one of those plays that you were just like, he's almost like the guy, that when you're playing a video game, the guy that everybody else, can't match up with. That he's just
he's like leveled up to 100 and everybody else is at like 68.
Yeah, it's. I saw. I wouldn't tell you that I saw Darrelle Revis being as good of a player as he was in the NFL, because he's a Hall of Famer. I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I think for a while there he was the best defensive player in the league, much the same way Aaron Donald is now. But I saw stardom in that guy. I saw it at a young age, and I saw it at Pitt, and so that you look back someday, and I think he was the number 14 pick in the NFL draft, or 13 or 14 pick. And it's like, he needed an incredible pro day to get that. And I saw that in him and thought, this guy is going to be a stud. He's going to be a superstar. And
he was. The 2 things that I remember about the 13-9 game, the first thing was they kept calling phantom holding penalties on Pitt. Remember, Shady would walk into the end zone, and there was a late call, and they would show the replay, and there was nothing. And, Pitt fans were going berserk about how the Big East was trying to get West Virginia to the national championship game and stop Pitt. And then the second thing I remember about that game was the post-game Rich Rodriguez news conference, where it seemed as if there was like a cardboard wall behind him, and the Pitt locker room was literally on the other side of the wall whooping it up as Rodriguez was in tears trying to hold his news conference. I got a chuckle out of that.
Yeah, that was certainly a crazy scene. And one of the things that really came out of that, Doc, is that there were kids, Cam Sadler and Jonathan Baldwin, I think were 2 of them. There were kids that were on either official or unofficial visits to West Virginia as guests of the Mountaineers that eventually committed to Pitt right after that they were like, I want to go to that school. I don't want to come here there. And that's one of the things I'll remember, is that game really was the catalyst for them to have a great recruiting class and to kind of clean up locally in the WPIL.
Kev, you've been a great guest. I mean, I usually try to keep these shows to about an hour. We're about an hour 15.
So we could go another hour and I wouldn't even blink, Doc.
I can talk ball with you all night long, Kevin. Listen, I really appreciate you coming on with me tonight, and hopefully maybe we'll have you on again sometime in the future. I know you got a lot of stuff coming on. Sports is your world and your livelihood, and it's coming back, and I'm happy for you, and I'm happy for all of us. Kev, where can the viewers who may not be familiar or not from Pittsburgh, where can they find you online?
You can find us at triblive.com. I cover the Pirates now, so you click on the sports and click on the Pirates, and you'll see my stories. I do during training camp. I've been doing a daily Take 5, where I do like 5 thoughts on the Pirates every morning based on what I reported the day before. I'll see how long I can keep that up. As long as there's material, I'll write it just to give people, to give the audience something to read. As you mentioned, I'm a weekend fan on the host, so we'll see whether I'm going to be going back to that anytime soon or not. But I'm always open to it. And you can follow me on Twitter. I think it's at let me check. I think it's at K Gorman. It used to be I changed my Twitter handle, but I think it's at. I have to make sure I have to get the right handle here. That's crazy. Let me give you the right one, Doc. At Kevin Gorman, capital PGH. So it's at
there you go.
ANGORMANPGH. It used to be at K Gorman Trib. And
last question for you, Kev. Do you like asking the questions or answering the questions better?
I prefer asking. I'm an inquisitive mind. I'm the type of guy that is curious about a lot of things, and I like to talk to athletes about their mentality. I'm a storyteller by nature, and as you can tell, I like to talk, but I also like to listen, and I think that's the important thing when you're interviewing somebody is listening and asking the good follow-up questions and getting to the heart of the matter. I try to be direct. I try to be forthright and honest with athletes. And I try to ask them questions that in a sensitive way, but in a very direct way. And I think that, to me, the heart of all of the writing comes from my reporting. And that's what I've always tried. Even when I was writing columns, I used to like to say that I had an informed opinion, that I didn't just give you, shooting from the hip. Here's what I think. Right. That it was based on conversations that I'd had with people, based on what I've seen, what I've heard, what I know.
Kevin, you're a great dude. You've become a good friend over the years. I appreciate you. Hang out backstage for me for a minute, if you would.
Hey.
All right. Listen, let me just tell you what we got going on here next week, because next Tuesday, we've got my man, Coach B, Mr. B, Howard Board. He's a City League legend. He's a legendary educator. He's a coach. He's been an assistant superintendent both in the Pittsburgh public schools. He's been an athletic director. He's worked in suburban schools. The state of education in America right now is in a state of flux, in crisis with the virus. And we're going to talk about all those issues with Mr. B on Tuesday. And then Thursday night, we have former Tree of Life Rabbi Chuck Diamond. Anybody who knows Rabbi Chuck knows what a character he is. Always insightful. He always brings it, and I can't wait to talk to those guys next week. You guys have been great tonight. Until next week, thanks for checking in. We'll do this again real soon. Peace.